Hello, good to be with you this morning. I come to you from Poughkeepsie, New York. We're located about 75 miles north of New York City on the Hudson River. I'm sorry I'm not able to get out to see your faith home, but this will have to do during these COVID times. I hope the title of my sermon this morning, "The Last Shall Be First and the First Last," might prompt you to think about one of those more memorable verses in the Bible. I knew the verse, I didn't know where it was located, so I had to go look it up. It's at Matthew 20, verse 16. I think the verse has universal meaning. This morning, that's exactly what I want to hold up. The whole concept of universality, and more specifically, universalism specifically. Now, the backstory of the verse is about a landowner who had a vineyard, and he would walk through the vineyard, or he'd walk through town and gather up workers early in the day, put them to work. He'd go back through town 2 or 3 times more during the day, and each time gather up workers and brought them to the vineyard to work. So at the end of the day, the landowner asked all those he had hired to get in line so that they could be paid. And he asked that those who had been hired the most recently to be in the front of the line, and those that he had hired the very early part of the day to be at the end of the line. The landowner started handing out compensation, and he paid each person the same amount of money. Not surprisingly, those who had been working longer were not excited by this notion and complained. They were upset, in fact. Said, wait, what's going on here? Those folks worked only a very few hours, and yet you paid them the same as me when I'd worked all day long. The landowner told those at the end of the line who were complaining that they were getting exactly what he had agreed to pay them when he hired them that morning. He agreed to pay them for a full day's work. And in terms of the notion of paying those who work for fewer hours, he said, this is my money, and I really get to use it as I choose. And if I want to be generous, I should have the right to do so. The chapter ends there. It doesn't tell us whether or not he satisfied the workers that had been paid for a day's work and worked all day. I hold up the parable because I think it speaks to universalism. Universalism is a philosophical, a theological orientation that speaks to what I believe is a fundamental truth: universal reconciliation. Theologically, it speaks to a belief that all can be saved and restored to right relationship with God. Now, I don't want to get into any arguments about theology or the veracity or the truth of the claim, but I do want to hold up the concept because I think it has significance to how we live our lives. I think it has significance in terms of how we interact with others and how we, in fact, perceive each other. It seems to me the real life implication, the real life application that I think is so important to contemplate is exactly that. What is a concept? What role does a concept play in terms of our interactions with each other? I believe the concept of universalism gives our faith its power. More importantly, and I do want to highlight this, I think it's not just the concept, but the internalization of the belief in universalism that has the ability to impact how we live our lives. The concept of universalism plays too little a role, I think, in the lived experience of our culture both inside our congregations and in the larger society in which we live. And I think it's a gift we as Unitarian Universalists should bring to the world around us. You see, that verse says it doesn't matter if you work all day. It doesn't matter if you pick more grapes than someone else. You are not worth more than another. You're not more worthy than another just because you work longer hours than another. I think this notion, the last shall be first and the first last, can be seen as the backbone of a moral code of conduct. I think that the belief, if it's operationalized, would make it impossible for one to perceive themselves as superior to another because of their station in life. It would get in the way of those with more money, those with more education than another, to adopt a perspective of superiority over those with less. It would put to a lie the belief that one's superior because of one's beauty, because of one's body size or its shape. It would make one sound silly, it seems to me, if they made negative assumptions about individuals because they lived in a poor part of town, or because they had a particular skin color or a particular sexual orientation. You see, beliefs of superiority and inferiority get in the way of unity. They can impede notions of equality. They separate one from another, and they can blind us to the other's humanity. We have an easy to see example of that as we talk about deplorables, as we talk about those on the left and those on the right. It's easy to miss another's humanity. I associate the theological concept of universalism with our seventh principle. It speaks to the respect of the interconnected web of all existence of which we are a part. It states explicitly, we are part of an interconnected web of existence, meaning we're connected to something bigger than our individual selves. The implication is what affects one affects us all. Now I want to be explicit this morning in juxtaposing the seventh and our first principle. First principle states a belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, the individual. Now, it does not state a belief in the equal worth and dignity of every person. So as a consequence, it leaves open the possibility that a tall person might be seen or self-perceive themselves as having more inherent worth than someone who's short, that one with more money or more academic knowledge might have more inherent worth than one without either of those assets, because it doesn't say inherent worth of every person. Now, I want to be careful not to be misunderstood. I have no interest whatsoever in demeaning that first principle. In fact, I think it's absolutely a powerful statement. It's an important statement. In fact, it's largely the statement that first attracted me to Unitarian Universalism. You see, I thought then, and I think it now, a community of faith that explicitly states a belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person would be of particular attraction to those whose identity has been or remains marginalized. But if we look around at our demographics of our typical UU congregation, either my presumption was and remains inaccurate, or our congregations could benefit from some self-introspection regarding the lived experience of our first principle. My lived experience of Unitarian Universalism is that there's a great deal of emphasis on the individual and much less attention paid to our interdependence with one another, our interdependence with other congregations, even our interdependence with the community in which our congregations reside. When I've stepped back and attempted to analyze our overarching dynamics, my observations, they don't surprise me. They do disappoint me at times, but they don't surprise me. Because you see, Unitarian Universalism largely grew up in the age of the Enlightenment, easily doted by the term, I think, therefore I am. It's a powerful and an important construct, but it's a flawed one. It ushered in a separation of mind and body, a separation of body and the external. It grounds one's very existence in the thinking mind, a unique and separate mind. It implies one does not have nor requires connection with the external. And if I am because I think is a foundational notion, it makes perfect sense. One would both highly value and vigorously defend one's thoughts and one's beliefs. You might even take it so far as to say one might defend it as if one's life depended on it. Such does not bode well for a sense of community, inclusion, or acceptance. So I want to hold up an alternative narrative, perhaps best framed by the phrase, I am because we are. The concept is captured in the African term Ubuntu. Ubuntu. Nelson Mandela defined it as a profound sense that we're human only through the humanity of others. The primary reference point is the other, interrelatedness, not personal thought or belief. It recognizes our personal best interests are inextricably tied to the best interests of the other. Such an organizing principle imposes a sense of moral obligation regarding our responsibility to and for others. Ubuntu is a wonderful metaphor, seems to me, for universalism. As I close, I want to highlight that our seventh principle should be a gift that Unitarian Universalism brings to the world. And I believe we should be intentional in sharing it. You see, I think it has particular emphasis and import now. Our world is in crisis with this virus. The expert tells us the primary tool we have to combat its powerful impact is to minimize the spread of the infection, that each of us must play a role to minimize that spread. So if inherent worth and dignity of every person is one's primary reference point, I think we run a grave risk that each person will maximize their own worth and dignity, and give preference to their own wants and needs, with potentially catastrophic consequences. What's needed, I believe, is for each of us to recognize and to be driven by the notion, I am because we are. With this as a primary reference point, decisions will be made based on what's in the best interest of the whole, the best interest of the web, not what's best for me as an individual. With that construct, based on that construct, we'll self-quarantine, not because we like it, but because we're driven by a moral obligation to the greater good. I ask you as I close, what better gift could we, as Unitarian Universalists, give to each other and to the world than to be driven by an obligation to that which is the greater good? May it be so. Amen. And help each other practice this important concept. Amen and Ashe. Thank you.